So we might get started. So again, thank you and welcome. My name's Deb Langridge. I have the privilege of directing the Consumer and Community Involvement Program, which is part of the WA Health Translation Network, one of the NHMRC accredited research translation centres. And the CCI program works with researchers, consumers, institutions and funders all the way across WA, but also at a national level as well. So, which is fantastic to have people joining us from all over the country today. And I had the privilege of having contact with the CP Achieve team, with Claire, last year during the final stages of the project, of which you'll hear more about in just a minute. And so it was the amazing wealth of information and expertise and experiences of this 5-year project were too good to not provide an opportunity to share and to share their experiences and their thoughts, the tips, the ideas, the things to do, the potential things to maybe not consider doing, all of those bits and pieces. So a practical workshop and a webinar today. So thank you for everybody for joining us. Just to get started, as I had said, just in terms of the webinar, if you can keep your microphones on mute, that would be very much appreciated, and use the chat function. I'm just going to do 2 acknowledgements, and then we'll hand over to Claire and to Freya, introduce them and hand over. Let me just bring that slide deck up. So firstly, I know, as I said, we have people joining us from all over the country, but an acknowledgement of country is important. The CCI program team are joining you from Wodja, the land of the proud Noongar Nation here in Perth. But it's also important for it to acknowledge Aboriginal people of the many traditional lands and language groups across Australia. So wherever you're joining, we want to acknowledge those traditional lands and acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal elders, both past and present, and pay respect to Aboriginal communities of today, and also to acknowledge anybody who's joining us in today's webinar that identifies and has a cultural heritage to Torres Strait Islander and or First Nations peoples. The other acknowledgement that is really important for us to be making is one of lived experience, which you will hear the practical applications of what that looks like in today's webinar. So we want to acknowledge the importance and expertise of the lived experience voice of consumers and carers and community, and recognise that their involvement makes a significant difference in supporting health research and impacting the health and wellbeing of our communities, and makes it even better, research even better, and the outcomes even better than what they could have been. So I'm just going to stop sharing now, and hand over and introduce our 2 amazing keynote presenters, but also Claire, thank you as the Knowledge Translation Fellow, but I know you're a whole lot more than that title, with the CP Achieve team. Thank you so much. It's been a joy working and getting to know you and about the project. So thank you. I'll hand over to you, if I can, to introduce our other amazing guest presenter, which is fantastic, and also any of the other team members from the CP Achieve team. Thank you.
We're really excited to be here today to share CP Achieve's consumer involvement journey with everyone in the room. As Deb said, I'm Claire Rowland. I'm CP Achieve's Knowledge Translation Fellow, and I've been working with CP Achieve for just over a year, really to bring together their consumer involvement knowledge into a resource which we're going to talk about and share today. I'm also the parent of a child with disability, and I have a history of working in the aid and development sector on gender equality, disability and social inclusion. So that's my background. I have a few team members with me today. Freya Munzel, who is co-presenting, and Freya, if you can wave. She's a young adult with cerebral palsy who's been involved as a consumer research partner with CP Achieve since 2021. She's passionate about research on participation and really supporting others, other people with disabilities' voice to be heard, and their families and communities, and to really have impact in the sector. She also works for the University of Melbourne in 2 roles. Firstly, as a consumer research partner on a study on belonging in schools for students with disability, and she is also a lived experience tutor on a subject on neurodevelopmental disability across the lifespan for medical students. So today she's actually dialing in from hospital. So thank you so much for being here today, Freya. We ask everyone's patience if Freya needs to step out for a second due to the hospital environment. So today we also have Ninyel Young from MCRI, who is MCRI's Consumer and Impact Coordinator. She's been with CP Achieve on our consumer involvement journey as a member of our Knowledge Translation Working Group, and in also sharing our work through the MCRI Consumer Involvement Network. Today she'll be responding to questions in the chat, so if you have any as you go, just as Deb said, please pop them in the chat, and if she can't respond to them immediately, we'll bring them up at the end and hopefully have time to address them then. We also have one of our consumer coordinators, Sevastine Katsakis. I think she is in the room. I didn't get a chance to check. She has lived experience of cerebral palsy, and she also coordinated involvement of adolescents and young adults with cerebral palsy in our program. She has recently returned from an amazing overseas holiday and she's a little unwell, so she's not presenting today. But I just wanted to acknowledge her in the room and say thank you so much, Sev, for all that you've done on this program. Well, I'm calling in from Djadjalawurrung country in the Macedon Ranges, and that picture we've got there is actually the magnificent Hanging Rock. If anyone's been there before, it's located right here. Freya's calling in from Wurundjeri country. We'd like to pay our respects to ancestors and elders past and present, and really extend this acknowledgement and respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, and your continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. So what are we going to be talking about today? We are going to firstly just give you a bit of information about CP Achieve, assuming that you may not know that much about them as yet. We're going to explain some of our consumer involvement strategies and learning over the 5 years of operation. We're also going to share our new consumer involvement resources and how you can access them. And at the end, there will be time, hopefully, for questions, but we have a lot to get through today, so let's see how we go. So firstly, let's get started with CP Achieve. CP Achieve stands for the Australian Centre for Independence, Economic Participation and Value Enhanced Care for Adolescents and Young Adults with Cerebral Palsy. It's a 5-year program of research aiming to promote good health, access to health services and improved participation for people aged 10 to 30 years with cerebral palsy in relationships, work, leisure, physical activity and community. We're funded by the NHMRC and due to finish at the end of this month. So we're so excited to be here today to share what we've done because we are finishing. Over the 5 years, we've involved 40 consumers on the project, and Freya's going to tell us a little bit about them now.
Thanks, Claire. All right, so as Claire said, we had over 40 people with CP and also their families involved in CP Achieve, and they were involved in different ways. For example, there were 4 advisory groups, but also people could be involved as consumer research partners on particular research projects. So the advisory groups that CP Achieve had were, there was one for parents of young people with cerebral palsy, one for adolescents with cerebral palsy, one for young adults or young people with cerebral palsy, and also for AAC users of CP. So AAC stands for alternative and augmentative communication. So for people with complex communication needs. As is often the case with getting consumers involved in research, diversity was a challenge, making sure that we had like a diverse range of voices involved. So for example, the parents group was only made up of mums. And the adolescent group, they were participants from similar backgrounds. Something that CP Achieve did do was recognise that people with cerebral palsy who did have complex communication needs and used AAC weren't often involved in research. So they set up a specific group to make sure that their voices were included in research. And the other thing we wanted to mention was that it was a mostly online involvement. And this is for a couple of reasons. Of course, you know, the last 5 years have been a lot of online stuff because of COVID-19, because of the pandemic, but also this increased accessibility to some people with cerebral palsy to be able to get involved, and also meant that people who were from different parts of the country were able to get involved much more easily. And next page, thanks, Claire.
So consumer involvement had real clear benefits and impact. And I'll just play you a short video clip of Jackie Ding, one of our researchers, and the type of benefits she saw from involving people with cerebral palsy and parents in CP Achieve research.
We can't hear Claire.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay. I'm not quite sure how to address that. Okay, maybe we'll move on. But one thing that Jackie Ding mentioned in her video clip there, which you can actually see later, you could download it and see that, is that she really enjoyed the opportunity for consumers on her program to be heard, to advocate for their rights, and to influence research that is about them. And because of that, she really felt that the research that she did with these consumers was fit for purpose and really reflected the needs and priorities of those consumers. Perhaps, Freya, you want to talk about some of those other benefits that we saw?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, in terms of community and identity, this is important for the young people with cerebral palsy and also for the therapists. So for some people with cerebral palsy, you know, this was the first time they'd really connected with other people with cerebral palsy before. And so building that sense of community and camaraderie was really important. And having the purpose of being involved in research gave a lot of people that sense of identity of being able to contribute something really meaningful that will impact on their lives and the lives of other people. I was actually speaking to one of the researchers, a physiotherapist, not a person with cerebral palsy, the other day, and she was talking about how being involved in consumer research with CP Achieve has changed her identity as a physiotherapist so much. You know, that she was working with a relatively new physiotherapist, and she reflected how she was so similar to that physiotherapist in starting, and how much she had changed over time, and being involved in this process had changed her, and so having that personal growth and that identity switch because of this process that she'd been through. As Claire, I suppose, as Claire mentioned as well, you know, through my involvement with CP Achieve, I've developed skills and gotten opportunities, such as, you know, being able to pursue further employment in the lived experience research area, which wouldn't have happened without my involvement with CP Achieve. And I know that there's other people that is the case for as well.
Yeah, and I think we also heard, Freya, that both researchers and consumers got new insights about what CP is. I remember chatting to another consumer who said, you know, he'd never met other people with CP with similar experiences before, and also had the opportunity to meet people with CP with different experiences. So I think for consumers and researchers, there are a lot of new insights and perspectives gained from being involved in the program. CP Achieve embedded consumer involvement across the research program, and there are a number of key learnings we have about how this was done. Firstly, consumer involvement was in the grant proposal, and that was really important. A number of chief investigators had experience of consumer involvement, and there were expectations that all researchers would involve consumers in some way. Researchers could access peer, supervisory, and theme leader support to do so. We also had a grants program which really focused on trying to enable consumer involvement at the early stages of research, so and across the research cycle. And we had a small grants program running every year, with grants probably about $2,500 each year for each project. We had a consumer network of 400 or more people, and this was really established for a number of reasons: to be able to share our research findings, and also to encourage consumers to be more actively involved in the program. And from that network, we did have 40 consumers, as Freya mentioned, actively joining the research process. We had a mentoring program for consumers, and we had a consumer involvement theme leader, and you can see her there on the right, Margaret, and she had a supervised research on consumer involvement, and she also supported the consumer involvement team, which is Carolyn on the left and Sev in the middle, who were responsible for providing orientation, advice, support for researchers and consumers, and brought their lived experience. Carolyn being a lived experience of being a parent of a child with disability, and Sev as a person with cerebral palsy herself. Perhaps you want to speak to this, Freya.
Thanks, Freya. Yes, so as Claire just mentioned, one of the really important things that CPA did was having that lived experience in the consumer coordinator team, with Carolyn and Sev having their own different lived experiences, which was very helpful, particularly for consumers getting involved, having someone who had some understanding of what it's like. So over the course of CP Achieve, only 4 out of the 40 consumers left the program, and this was due to study pressures. Totally understandable. So CP Achieve, they got to know their consumers and their interests, and this was done by developing profiles with consumers to get to know them and help identify research opportunities that match them and their interests. So for adolescents with cerebral palsy, parents were involved, and especially initially were very involved. But once they saw that their children were supported adequately and supported through the process, parents tended to step away and let their children more independently get involved. And some of the ways that Sev supported this was by making the sessions fun. So running trivia nights and other activities for the adolescent group, and particularly in between research opportunities, to build that community and make sure that the group was engaged and connected. The other things that really helped with retention of consumers was having regular check-ins, particularly when projects were maybe on hold a little bit or in between projects. As it said, making sure it was fun, and also for how that looked for adolescents was, maybe you'd say there's trivia nights, but how that looked for the young adults might have been a bit more like encouraging group discussions about cats and dogs and what pets you have and that sort of thing, and having check-ins with people. Sharing resources to consumers 2 weeks prior to meetings was helped with supporting preparation and involvement. And that meant that people's accessibility needs were met as well. Okay, so in terms of minimizing the power imbalance between consumers and researchers, the main way that this was done was by having a minimum of 2 consumers, involved in each project. And also by addressing power imbalances through their communication approaches. Safety was also considered, particularly around medical trauma and mental health. So researchers were encouraged to be aware of potential medical and administrative trauma that consumers may have faced, and try not to re-traumatize consumers. And researchers were also offered the opportunity to do a mental health first aid course to support their work with consumers. Lastly, at the end or towards the end of CP Achieve, or through each individual consumer's involvement with CP Achieve, making sure that that loop was closed. So acknowledging the contributions and the impact that that particular consumer had on CP Achieve and in the particular projects that they were involved in. And I love this quote here on the screen from Sev: feeling known and valued is important for the development of consumer confidence and willingness to engage in research. Thanks, Claire. Next.
No problem, Freya. And just adding as well that in terms of acknowledging contributions and impact of consumers, we had a lot of consumers that were co-authors on research papers when they were really actively involved in that research and deserved to be involved. They also, and I believe you did as well, Freya, present at conferences. And so there are a number of ways of recognising and valuing their involvement in those projects. So let's go on to talking about how we accommodated consumer needs. Certainly, I know probably a lot of people will be asking what type of accommodations we had and how this was done. We found that accommodating consumer needs was really an iterative process. So consumer involvement was new to a lot of our consumers and a lot of our researchers. So we developed these profiles, as Freya said, up front to really get a sense of some of the support or accommodations that would be needed to enable those consumers to access the research process. But we also rechecked in when they were linked to a specific research project to understand what that might look like in the context of that project. But what we found over time is that consumers didn't necessarily know up front what kind of accommodations they might need because it was so new to everyone. So it was really important to be checking in and improving process along the way and being responsive to consumer needs. So, and we've got a box there of examples of accommodations, but maybe Freya, you'd like to share some of the accommodations that were helpful for you or for others that you know of in the program.
Absolutely. And I think it's it is really hard because it is such an individual thing. And as Claire said, it can be really difficult to identify what you need at the start. So having that regular check-in is so important. I think for myself, the most important things was having someone who understood that I work best when someone else is able to take notes for me, because that's something that I really struggle with. So when I was working with researchers, I would ask them if they would be happy to send me an email summary of what was discussed. And a lot of other people have found that being able to take time to write comments or notes or add in thoughts into something like a Google document or a Word document that is shared allows them the time to be able to use any assistive technology they need to be able to share their thoughts. I think that some people require, particularly say people who have complex communication needs or use AAC, might require a little bit longer to be able to share their thoughts. And so making sure that there's that etiquette around and understanding around ensuring that they're involved as much as possible in the ways that work for them. And yeah, just to reiterate as well that the checking in and asking over time is just so important because people's needs will change. I mean, even for myself, I'm in hospital at the moment. And so my computer setup is completely different, which makes it incredibly difficult for me to be able to do the work that I usually would be able to do to the same level. So I've had to explain, that I'm not maybe able to be as quick at responding as I typically would be because of the computer setup here. So understanding that sometimes even situationally, accommodations will need to change. Thanks, Claire.
Great, thank you, Freya. Amazing, and we do so much appreciate you being here today with us from hospital. So thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, or we wanted to talk a little bit about AAC users What we have demonstrated through the program is that AAC users can and really must be involved in research that is about them, and they have a right to be involved. If you're unsure what an AAC user is, an AAC user uses alternative or augmentative communication. They might use keyword sign, they might use a speech generation device, they might use picture symbol-based communication in addition to speech or instead of speech. So often they're excluded from research because people feel nervous, I think, around working with them, and they are unsure how to communicate them or how to involve them. But in CP Achieve, we established as Freya mentioned early on, a group of AAC users to really guide us on how we could involve them in research in the program, and also as a result of that developed an inclusive research toolkit so other researchers in the sector could learn from that. One of the key things that is in that toolkit is really around AAC etiquette, and we really suggest this is established early on. And what does that mean? That really is basically the rules around how you're going to communicate within that research process, within meetings, around meetings. An example might be, for example, if you have an AAC user that is using a speech generating device and you're in a meeting and they look down in a discussion, it's likely that they are preparing a response using their device to the discussion at hand. And so everybody needs to give time and space for the AAC user to be able to prepare that response. So time is really, and Freya mentioned this in the previous slide, time is really critical consideration for accessibility of AAC users. Definitely more time needs to be provided for meetings, for preparation and sharing what the meetings will be about, what the discussion will be about, and to enable these consumers to prepare their response, because if you are using a speech generating device, for example, or another form of communication, it can take a lot longer than speech and it can take some preparation. So users, consumers may want to prepare their answers to a discussion, and you might also consider, well, what kind of questions are we asking? And let's not waste the energy of this consumer on yes, no kind of questions. Let's focus on where we really need to provide an opportunity for their influence and impact. Minimizing power relations with AAC users is really important if you consider the fact that historically they would have probably faced a lot of situations where people have discounted their voice and not thought that they had something to share, and may have either not given them space to share or immediately talked to a family member or made decisions for them without checking in with them. So Jacinta, who's there with the quote on the side of the slide, she worked with AAC users on her research, and she is a speech therapist, and she said she made sure when she was working with these users to never actually act as a speech therapist. She never commented on their communication. She never corrected them, of course, or did anything that would establish a power relationship similar to a client and therapist relationship. And of course, another key part of that, which Freya also mentioned, was making sure there were more consumers in the room than there were researchers. So when planning to work with AAC users, there really are additional costs, and definitely I would encourage you to look in our resources to get some sense of that, because we want to make sure that this is authentic engagement, which means giving people enough time to really be actively involved, to engage with the content and engage in meetings or other activities. And certainly when you see what these users have, these consumers have done, you'll be extremely impressed, as we all were. So Budgeting. Now, I don't know how much time we have. Let me just have a quick check. Oh, we still have a bit of time. Okay. I know that everyone is probably asking about budgeting generally for the involvement of consumers with disability, and we have lots to share on this topic. The first key thing, obviously, is that payment is a critical acknowledgement of consumer contributions. You need to pay your consumers. Gift cards have pros and cons. Because of the setup of MCRI, we needed to use gift cards, and that really was advantageous for a lot of our consumers. They didn't have to go through the administrative requirements that employment or as a contractor would require, which could be things like doing training on child protection, for example, and a range of training, and filling out lengthy forms. So in this context, we found gift cards to be a useful way of sharing payment. You need to consider the pace of activities for your consumer needs. Now, this, of course, is a challenge to know beforehand when you are developing your budget. And that's why we'd always encourage you to connect with consumers prior to developing a budget to really understand support and the accommodation needs, because you'll need to be budgeting for them as well. You're not only budgeting for time to prepare and support consumers, you're also budgeting for necessary accommodations. And you can see in that little graph next to it, that's just one of the budgets from one of the research projects in our resource that you'll get a chance to download and have a look at. And we provided a range of research projects from CP Achieve and a range of budgets just to give you a sense of what involvement could cost and look like for different kinds of involvement. We had the grant program, which I mentioned before, and we found that grants were often underspent. And this is a big thing for running a grant program as well. We had an annual grant cycle, but obviously ethics considerations and other grants didn't necessarily align with our timetable for providing grants. And we found that sometimes researchers weren't able to get their grants or their ethics approval to closer to the end of the year, and then they were rushing to involve consumers. So this is certainly something we learned and would adapt to in future. And over to you, Freya, to talk about flexibility.
Yeah, so consumers can be involved in so many ways, and I think that's one of the really interesting things that's come out of CP Achieve is like how different consumers can get involved and how important understanding the different ways that consumers can get involved. So involvement early in projects was encouraged, but it wasn't always possible, and it wasn't always maybe the most suitable for every single consumer based on what their needs were, their accommodation requirements, and what they were interested in being involved in. So the needs and confidence and resources of both parties affect involvement, of course. And as I kind of indicated, part involvement is okay. In fact, means that you can get some voices from people who maybe aren't as traditionally likely to be as involved in research as a consumer, because they can be involved in ways that work the best way for them. Similarly, different levels of involvement can occur across one project. So someone might be really involved at the start of a project or in the middle of a project, but be less involved in other parts. That might be based on interest levels, what they're. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Sorry, everyone. I don't know where that sentence is going, but we will move on. Anyway, but different levels of involvement can occur in the one project, and that can look a bit different over time, based on people and their interests and their needs as well. And it's really important, particularly for people with disability and people with cerebral palsy, that themselves and their families often face like additional administrative load, for example, the NDIS or government systems, schools, etc. And so having an understanding of and responsiveness to this to accommodate and be flexible across time is really important to ensure that consumers are able to be involved across a project and throughout different researches. And we've got a beautiful quote from Michelle there, kind of speaking to that. So she says that September was a tough month for me due to my daughter's surgery, and I lost track of everything, missing a couple of meetings and feeling guilty about it. I even considered stepping away. However, Jackie was understanding. She told me, "That's okay. Come back when you're ready." Now that I'm back, she's so thankful and appreciative of whatever I can do. So yeah, having that flexibility and understanding really means that consumers are able to come back when they're able to and get involved when they can in the ways that they can. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, no problem, Freya. And just
We've got
adding,
about 5 minutes left, Claire.
okay, great, we're almost done. So I just wanted to add there that there are other, that we did have the 2 levels of involvement. We had the advisory groups or the active involvement of consumer research partners in projects, and some projects actually had both in their projects. So they had advisory group involvement at the beginning or at the end at various points, and then they also had consumer research partners working throughout the program in a more ongoing way. So that's another way that you could be flexible as well.
I'll touch on quickly, Claire, as well. Recognising that people with cerebral palsy and also parents of people with cerebral palsy have very unique and different skills. And that's something that particularly later on in CP Achieve, we recognise, I think, a lot of. And so some of the projects that I've been involved on have involved people sharing skills that are a bit different from just sharing their lived experience skills. Maybe, you know, they have skills in photography, for example, and recognizing that there are really talented people with disability out there who are able to contribute in different ways. I'll just quickly add that in as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Freya. We don't have a lot of time, so we might skip through this slide, Freya, and go to the next slide.
Yep.
I guess the key point of this slide, everyone, is that really vulnerability is really important, and being able to learn alongside your consumer if you're a researcher or vice versa. So that's really important, to be able to not feel like you have to know everything. You don't have to be across everything. What you need to do is be able to learn together, negotiate involvement, and respond to the needs of your consumer. And over to you for our key takeaways, Freya.
Yeah, so let's quickly go through these. It does kind of go without saying, but people with disability are fundamentally people. It's than they are, but speaking to people and working with them, communicating directly with the with consumers is, you know, is a really good start of making that relationship and building that rapport. It's really important to note that working with consumers makes disability and health research better, and also it builds researchers' confidence. Involving consumers as early as possible is always great. It's awesome that all people with disability, including AAC users and people with physical and intellectual disabilities, can be involved in research and create a significant impact. And of course, always working on getting more diversity to the table as well. Consumers with disability bring a lifetime of lived experience, and that is unique to them. And it's also important to note that CP does not only impact or influence the perspectives of consumers, but it also impacts the ways in which they can get involved in research. That's going to be individual to every person as well. Thanks, Claire.
And I'll just continue by talking a little bit about the process, and given time, I won't go on about it, but really, our experience of working with people with CP, which would be relevant to working with a range of consumers with disability, is that really to promote authentic involvement, you need to give time for their preparation. Give them 2 weeks. If you're having a meeting, let them send all the information 2 weeks before. Give them time to prepare their responses and engagement for that meeting, particularly AAC users. Negotiate involvement. It is not about knowing everything that needs to be done, all the accommodations. It's really about asking and negotiating. What are the priorities of the consumer? How do they want to get involved? What supports are needed? How should we communicate? And monitoring it over time and improving over time. We certainly were not perfect. Mistakes were made, but it was definitely a learning journey that we put a lot of effort into. Be flexible with your consumers. We've just talked a lot about that. Build community and maintain communication. We haven't talked a lot about that, but one of the biggest challenges and the calls that I think our consumer involvement consumer coordinators received the most was about communication and gaps in communication due to the research cycle, waiting for ethics or grant approval. So definitely keep up the communication. Safety, recognise the specific safety issues for people with disability and risks of re-traumatisation. So think about administrative and medical trauma, being dragged through systems, forced to fill out forms, not listened to, and have to put in significant effort to get supports, for example. And when you're budgeting, make sure you budget for extra time and supports for all the activities and consider the specific needs of your consumers. You can't generalise. Everybody is unique and has specific unique needs. So just to finish off, I'd really like to invite you all to discover more about our journey in our new resources. Please use this QR code, but we will also send out links later. Thank you, Deb, for doing that. The resources that we have include a written guide featuring a lot of our stories. So we profile different projects, we talk about the budget, we talk about what consumers did on each project, what the impact of their involvement was. We also have 13 short videos that really support that and give more insight. You're very welcome to share these resources with your network, post it on your website, do whatever you would like. That would be fabulous. And if you have any questions, CP Achieve is finishing, as I mentioned, but MCRI and Ninil is there, so please get in contact with her. And that is it from us today. Thank you so much.
That's great.
Deb.
And look, it truly was an amazing snapshot. And can I just say the resource itself, it's over 100 pages of not just the story, but great examples of the practical how-to. So in different situations, what you did, and the different projects are very deliberately and intentionally different as a result, which I think is really important. Can I encourage you to put any questions in the chat function? That would be fantastic. And yeah, as I said, and Claire, we can probably stop sharing, which is great. So we can, which is fine. I mean, I like your screen, and that's brilliant. But yeah, it's good to see. Good to see the fuller screen. But we, as I had said, we will, the CCI program will be following today's webinar via email, details about the recording. It will be where you can find that and source that about today's webinar, the slide deck that was used, as well as the link to the resource and the videos. And it is just a marvel to be able to, it is so easy to use. It was absolutely co-designed with the entire CP Achieve team, and the stories that you hear turn the theory of working with people with disability, not just aspects related to CP, because as Claire and Freya have talked about, there are great lessons learned, to include more broadly. Just a few things. So we did, as I had mentioned when we first started, we did give the opportunity for people to ask some questions in advance of today's webinar in terms of things that they would like to know. And some of those questions, there were some ongoing themes, one of which both Claire and Freya, I know you've kind of mentioned, but what would be, to summarise, what are the high level practical tips that you think that helped people connect but made it easy for your consumers and family and carers to actually be involved? What were the high level learnings, the tips that would be helpful for people to know?
I'll get started first if you want, like Freya, but I'll talk about the adolescents. And Sev, I'm not sure if she's here today, but I'll just summarise some of her things that she did to really involve those young people, the adolescents under 18. look, working with parents was really important, and Freya spoke to that earlier, and making it fun through trivia nights, Christmas parties. She also, at the end of each call, put aside, 5 to 10 minutes for the consumers to sit and get to know each other in breakout rooms. So there was a real sense of community and connection, and that was really important. She assigned team leaders, peer team leaders from the group itself, who would then encourage other consumers to speak up and feel confident about what they were saying. And they had processes like initially, a speaker would introduce the next speaker and say what they liked about. The next speaker would explain, what they liked about what the previous speaker had said, just to try and build confidence. And I think with those adolescents, building confidence is really important, and making it fun and building that community. So that were just some of the basic tips, but there's a whole chapter on it. So please go and get the resource. And I don't know, Freya, if you wanted to add something for the young adults.
Quick. I think just recognizing the importance of communication, that regular communication, understanding that a lot of consumers don't understand research processes like ethics approvals and how long they can take, those sort of things. So having an easy way to communicate, I found over time that that improved a lot, and working with the consumers and the researchers to work out what works best for that particular group, because that might look different for each particular group. Some people will prefer email over another form of check-in.
And that's where I think both Freya and Claire, there's lots of opportunity, whether or not to understand and to ask those questions, which I know you did, like the team did to begin with. So not to make the assumption that social media is the be all and end all, but, all different platforms within social media or forming. So what did that, I know Freya, you'd mentioned that it was different, but were there some collective things that actually worked well that for most people in terms of that communication, and which built relationship and confidence?
Yeah, so I think that generally speaking, what seems to have worked the best is having the big kind of things that remind us of this is a big thing that we're working on, that is sent out by email, and then reminders about that is on some sort of group chat function. Yeah. And that also can help with the rapport building, because you're all together in a group. And we all know how difficult reply all emails are to like keep track of. Having a few different touch points, I think, is actually quite important to help people. And we're talking about a lot of consumers that have incredibly busy lives, and a lot of administrative burden. So having a few different ways that they can keep in touch and keep in the loop is quite important, without also being overwhelmed. So just having emails not be sent constantly, and be sent for the big things, I think helps. Generally speaking, a lot of people appreciate the emails for the most important sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and
I
Freya,
think that was,
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that was something, and in the stories that you highlighted well, in terms of, people weren't left wonder whatever happened to that thing that I got involved with and I didn't hear anything else about. So yeah, I think that it absolutely brings value, which comes out in the stories that are shared, which is fantastic. Sorry, Claire. Yep.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so we had the question about tips and getting people to connect and engage. Another question related to timing considerations, which I know you talked about, which is a brilliant one in terms of plan in advance, and also within meetings to kind of accommodate. Are there any tips specifically around timing considerations that helped? That allowed people to be valued, but also allowed them to feel comfortable and gave them time to engage?
Yeah, so across the program, researchers were encouraged to always give 2 weeks notice, or not 2 weeks notice of meetings, but send out documents prior to meetings. And this actually really, a lot of researchers that I talked to when developing the resources really talked about how this actually really was helpful for them, because it really got them very organized. But you can imagine that it can be quite challenging when you're trying to do the research and you're trying to send information forward so that you can have authentic involvement. But really, it's not very reasonable to expect consumers to engage with materials, particularly if it's of a complex and research nature where they may not have had experience of that before, without actually seeing it. Obviously, writing it in plain English, and really considering what it is you want engagement on. I know, Freya, you've said to me before that you found it really helpful. I think it was you, sorry if I'm mislabeling, when there were really, really big documents that consumers were asked to comment on, that the researcher said, look, your comment on all of it, but this particular area I think will be really relevant to you and really needs your oversight.
That's great, and that guidance, because documents can be large and or kind of direct, so being knowing where to start first can be a helpful thing. The other, we did get some questions relating to the way that the lived experience voice of consumers, of people with CP and carers, how did that change potentially the way, like the decision making and or the research outcomes? So where did, are there any specific examples that really just go, we are so glad that we did this because it actually changed potentially what the original idea was, or it helped change the direction or the progression? Is there an example that you can give?
So many examples, all detailed in the resources.
They are.
And I'm sure Freya will want to share her experience. She has a great story about how her and other consumers on her project impacted the research outcomes and also the journal article feedback that they had. I'm just thinking in terms of decision making, a really interesting story was that of Jackie Ding, who was a PhD candidate on the program, and she was doing research and developing an online health module, and she had a working group of people from the sector, like different allied health representatives, and also a parent and a person with cerebral palsy. So I think 2 or 3 consumers in her working group who actively were involved in fortnightly meetings, who were involved in all the decision making, reviewing content, deciding what would be in the health module, reflecting on. They also had an advisory group, and the advisory group reviewed content that they developed and then gave feedback. And then, within that working group, those consumers were discussing and negotiating, well, how are we going to respond to this feedback? And so not only did they kind of impact a small part of that research process and the outcomes, they were actually integral to the whole thing. So, their personal stories made a huge difference. I think one of them, Michelle, which we featured earlier on in this, a quote from her, she has a daughter with cerebral palsy who's a wheelchair user, and she said, with these health resources, they need to reflect her desire to have a partner. What about sex? What about a whole range of topics that we all seem very nervous to cover here? It's not just about eating and doing exercise, okay? It's about what you need for full participation in life. And she really pushed that, and everyone took that on board. And so that is an example of how
that's brilliant.
She impacted. Freya, did you want to talk about?
We've got 1 minute left, so
sorry, Freya.
No, that's okay. And Freya, I know there's one of the videos that's available is of you sharing your experiences, which is brilliant. I don't want to miss the opportunity to thank you both so much, and the work that the project has done in the last 5 years with funding from NH and MRC. It has just been remarkable, and I am so thankful that as a team, you decided to not want to keep all of this information to yourself, can I encourage you to, for everybody who's attending today, take the time to look at the resource. It is incredible. And as there's a link to follow up via email, we'll provide all of those details following on. And there are some preliminary discussions about a potential masterclass, an online 3-hour masterclass to turn the theory into practice broadly as well, using the CP Achieves team to be able to share a bit more about the specifics of, in this situation, this is something to consider. So those practical tips and ideas as well. So we will keep you in touch with any of those progressions with things, but we'll also send out all of the links. I can't thank you both enough. Thank you. It's been a joy having you share with us in today's webinar, both Freya and Claire. And Freya, seriously, like above and beyond. I can't believe. And hey, the hospital team now know that you're involved in research and you're there promoting even in that way, which is fantastic. Both remarkable. To thank you for your time and the effort and the energy that's gone in, even just into today's presentation. Thanks everybody for joining us. Look out for an email to follow up from today's webinar. We really appreciate your time and know that this will continue to contribute to people with a lived experience being involved in research, but also making it even better, which is fantastic. So thanks everyone. Thank you both, Claire and Freya. Congratulations. And yeah, we look forward to being in touch with everybody in lots of other different ways. So thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb.